Welcome back to Beers Blazers Basketball Galactica.
Yeah.
It's post draft. It was a fun draft, even though we gave up a few picks. We'll talk about that in a second. We'd also like to touch on the opening of free agency. I don't know, it's been 12 hours essentially since
Yeah.
free agency opened. Talk a little bit about that. We're gonna save the beer talk for the next iterations. Not a lot's changed since last time. We're still drinking, but nothing new to report. So let's just start on the draft and maybe just touch on the lottery.
Yeah.
And let's start particularly with our Portland Trailblazers. What did you think of the draft?
Yeah. It started off really interesting with us moving the 14th pick. I think you and I, and then friends of ours, we had discussed, shout out Tom and Rye and others. We had discussed like, oh, here's potential for the seventh pick. Here's a potential, prospects for the 14th pick. And so when we made the move, and again, foreshadowing a little bit here, but we made the move for Deni Avdia. That trade, obviously, we lost the 14th pick as part of that move. And so I think initially, and maybe others feel differently, but initially it was kind of tough to lose that 14th pick because we had reviewed so many of the prospects and talked about how a lot of the prospects after the third or fourth pick were really similar, in potential and even floor from like picks forward and outside the lottery even. So I was a little disappointed in that, but
It was bad for business, but it was good
yeah.
for Blazers. Yeah.
And I think after that, looking at Deni Avdia, I honestly, and I've told you this, GMAC, I didn't realize the type of year he had had in Washington. I didn't play fantasy hoops last year, so I lost it a little bit out on the statistics of players from just last season. Whereas I didn't realize he had averaged like 15 and 7 and actually improved his 3-point percentage that much to like over 37%. But also the fact that, and GMAC, you've pointed this out, that he has probably the most team-friendly contract or one of the most team-friendly contracts in the entire league. I think it descends down to what, 10, $11 million in the fourth year. It's like a 4-year, $55 million contract. So
Yeah,
looking at it from that perspective, yeah,
yeah. He's at 6.2 at the end of his scale right now, rookie
hmm
scale contract. And then next year being 24, 25, this year coming up after the
yeah,
offseason, jumps up to 15.6, then 14.4, then 13.1, and then ends up at 11.8. So essentially 12 million.
yeah.
And that's right into his prime. So you get to make some decisions, but that's pretty ridiculous for anyone who makes it to their second contract. And then the
Exactly.
descending stuff is just awesome. I wish more contracts were like that.
Sure helps. I mean, the player obviously has to be agreeable to it on the
Yeah.
contract side of things, but it sure helps a team's cap scenario, especially in a growing CBA, but with some interesting nuance to it now with the second apron and things. So from that side of it, just kind of recognizing, okay, we have Avdia as a starting level wing at this point, and we can maybe chat more about that later. But then our
I
actual,
said, let's just jump into Denny as I'm
sure,
looking on right
sure, let's go.
now.
Yeah. You talk to me about him. Like, what do you
Yeah.
like? What do you
I,
dislike? Yeah.
so I think the trade itself, which was Malcolm Brogdon,
Mhm.
the 14th pick, a 2029 pick, which there's three first rounds at the Blazers zone. It's going to be the one in the middle, what not the worst, but not the best. That'll go to them, and then a couple of seconds, which that's fine. I think we traded one of our seconds this year for three more seconds in the future, so that's easy. At first that seemed like a lot,
Mhm.
and I think we're all guilty of overvaluing first round picks, not necessarily thinking about where they actually end up in the draft. 14, certainly there were some guys there that we both liked, but and like you, I didn't know that much about Avdia. And I think the biggest thing, obviously he had a good offensive season, but the biggest thing was I did some really deep digging, actually watched a lot of like full game type of highlights of just him. Uh, he's a really good defender, which
Mhm.
I made the mistake of, oh, he's a big white guy, so he's probably not that good at defense. But he is a legitimate point of attack defender, and he is big. He's 6'9", not a huge wingspan. I think it's also 6'9", but when you're 6'9", that's good enough. He's definitely not like a skinny fellow. He's thick. And so I think what I'm most excited about is, yes, this was the first year that his three-point shooting had been respectable, I guess we'll say. 37%, I think, is what he shot. I mean, to double check that, I've got it
Yeah,
open.
it's about 37, I think.
Yeah, 37, 0.374. So right smack dab in the middle. Low volume. He
Yeah,
shot a little less than 4 a game. But 50% overall from the field. He gets to the basket. Again, I made this comparison and I make it only in play style, but he uses his big body as like Luca kind of does. Like he's a big 6'9" guy who can get in the lane, who's not athletic, but he's strong and big bodied enough that he can get those shots up. Again, I'm not saying he's Luka Doncic, but there's not a lot of players that are like big guards like that aren't athletic that can use their body that way. And so I was happy to see that. But again, the defense, like say we trade Jeremy Grant, and that's we'll talk a little bit about free agency and trades and stuff later, but like he can play the 4. You have
hmm
Tumani who can play the 3 or 4. Like that's a really good couple of defenders. Not to say Aminu and Harkless were great, but I think that would be the best combination of size and defense if you had those two guys there,
right.
or if Jeremy stays. But those were my first impression was, hey, we maybe paid a little too much, did some digging. I'm pretty bullish now on him and excited, and I'm not so worried about the picks, especially 14. I don't feel like we really missed on anyone. And I think there's a possibility we get the guy I would want at 14 who dropped that far, maybe in a trade. So
Could very well happen.
long-winded answer, but what are your takes on him?
So I already talked a little bit about him, but again, like you said, wasn't that familiar with his last season's game at least. He made a pretty good leap last season, and so coming to realize that, also understanding that you talked about his defense, but he's big for a forward, whether he'll play, depending on some of our moves. But Grant, kind of moved to that 3 small forward position later in the year last year for us. Him playing the 3-4 as a 6'9" forward, that's going to be really nice. Just to have the size, which I feel like we haven't had in a little bit, as far as matching the talent with size that can actually play for the Blazers in those wing positions. The other thing besides the defense that I'd like to mention is just the fact that he is a bit of a playmaker. So
Yeah,
averaged like close to 4 assists, I think,
forces. Yeah, on
last
a
season,
horrible team
and on a horrible team.
with no
And again,
shooting.
so
Yeah,
with no shooting, so he shot well. So I know we kind of go back and forth on the efficiency thing, but you hope that him being on a bad team and having that that climb in statistics doesn't necessarily mean he's going to kind of fall back to earth. I don't think we're going to be, we're probably not going to be almost assuredly not in like the play-in position or a playoff position next season. We're still obviously in a development phase, but you hope he doesn't have like a crash in three-point percentage or something. You hope he holds on to that shooting level of efficiency. But I was also surprised again at the playmaking side of things. So that's really nice. Also, he had a couple, and you probably looked at this too, GMAC, but he had a couple huge games post trade deadline. I think he had like a 43-point game in the last couple months of the season. And so kind of watching those highlights. And again, a lot of guys in the NBA have standout games. It's the NBA is largely about who can be consistent. Like all these guys have elite level talent. It's the best league in the world, obviously, but who can do it consistently? That's what really separates players. But I mean, I think he's what, 22, 23 years old still? Is that accurate?
23. Yeah, he's we
23.
we
So
were so apt to point out he's younger than Dalton Connect.
Dalton Connect, yeah, which I'm sure that we'll mention his name again later.
Yeah,
But
he
yeah,
won't be
so
24 until January. So like he's it's not like he's
yeah,
been in the league. This will be his 5th year,
this is his 5th year in the league, so he's a really young prospect. The Wizards aren't exactly apt for developing prospects. I'd say at this point, like I like some of their younger guys like Bilal Koulibaly, and we can talk about Sar that they drafted at 2. But so all that to say, I think it was a shock at first, but I've come around to the idea that he's a young enough prospect. We're not, we didn't bring in another 28 to 32-year-old that we're like, why are, this doesn't fit our timeline at all. So with his versatile skill set plus his contract, I kind of come around to the fact that we have him as a starting level wing for the Blazers, and I'm actually happy to have him here. So
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned, he had some big games towards the end of the year. I mean, they had made some trades, obviously, like Gafford, and they had sat some guys towards the end of the year, and his role increased. And that's one reason you saw these big improvements or big games. But I do think, like, even pre-All-Star, just looking at his splits, he was still 14 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, 4 assists. And I think what's better and probably more realistic is like he was shooting 52% from the field and over 40% from three. And then once he took on a bigger role, he only shot 32% from three. Still shot well from the field overall. But like, again, if you somewhere halfway between those two things, which is kind of where it ended up, like I would just be happy with the 14, 7, and 4 too
yeah,
on good efficiency. And
yeah,
I don't think Blazers, hopefully, we're not ever looking at him as, hey, he's going to be our top scorer. I think you're looking at him
no,
in the Batum style of like he's a
right.
connector, maybe the third or fourth option, but he has a bunch of tools. He's a good defender. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about him. I plugged him into 2K this weekend and played a little with him. He was fun. So
That's what
yeah,
makes it official. The
yeah, that's
2K, the
official.
2K
Exactly.
official. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
So
let's just jump into maybe the Blazers drafting Clingan now, since we kind of
sure.
talked about Advija, the Advija move.
Yeah.
Obviously, Blazers at 7 drafted Donovan Clingan, the UConn center. Um, and I don't think it was much of a shock leading up to the draft. We had heard that the Blazers really coveted him, that he had a really good workout for the Blazers. And we've since seen some of his, like I think the Trailblazers Twitter/X alias at this point, posted like some of his workout highlights. And I'm always hesitant to see those type of solo workouts where you're like, okay, this is against guys, with the pads on their arms that are trying to like play defense against players, or also seeing a big shoot threes. I'm like, we always talk about how pretty much everyone in the NBA, I mean, there's videos of Andre Drummond hitting like 10 to 12 3-pointers in a row, right? So that's not something that you necessarily see translate from a solo workout into an actual game type setting, because these guys are all just so good. But you do see that the shooting could be there at a baseline level. This is a center, back-to-back national championships. Certainly more of a pivotal role in the second most recent championship for UConn, but 7'2", 7'3" guy with a huge wingspan, just a really massive human. We talked about him in our last video, talking about, the draft prospects, but this is a person that you hope that translates that defensive level of prowess that he had at UConn. Obviously, that often happens where a prospect has, a really good defensive floor at the college level, and that translates to the pro level. So we hope to see that with Clingan, obviously. Um, I think he'll be a really solid screen setter for Scoot, which is something that we want in developing Scoot's game in the next couple of years. And then the other thing I'll just say is we saw with some of his highlights at UConn, especially, that he is a pretty capable passer, even more of like a slip passer from the high block, low block area, where he can find those slashers, cutters, and those perimeter players. He's, we're not talking anything no look or point guard level or Jokic level passing even, but it's something where he has that foundational skill set, I think. Now, how he fits with the rest of our roster, including our current starting center, DeAndre Ayton, as well as, we obviously have Rob Williams, we have Duop Reith, which Duop is going to be probably more of a third string center regardless. But with some of the, with the first 2 players in the rotation right now, you wonder just like how that will necessarily play out. So, but overall, I'm pretty happy with Clingan as our 7th pick. Again, a lot of pundits had him going higher. So There was even mention of him going, and I know you mentioned if the Hawks take him at 1, that would be a huge mistake. But there was mention of him going as high as 1 to the Hawks, and I think in a low-level draft, getting him sliding to 7, it's certainly I wouldn't say DeAndre Ayton is providing elite level rim protection at this point. So having that pillar of maybe both a combination of Avdia as well as Clingan now. We hope that foundational defensive floor is kind of being established for the Blazers. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts, GMAC?
Yeah, I mean, I think he obviously is very low on my big board. I just didn't see that we had a need. I like the idea of him as a backup, but I think the fact that the Blazers are so enamored with him, I think they have to believe that the shooting is real.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing he can do to become a perimeter defender. He's just too big. And if he wasn't that big, the advantages of the rim protection, go away. So
Right.
I do think I'm hoping he's not seen as just a replacement for Aiton regardless. I'd still like to see what Aiton can do after the way he finished last season, especially with like health around him.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of Klingon in theory, like if he can shoot, they've talked to everyone's worried, and they did it last year where you're going to play the two bigs together, like Robert Williams and DeAndre Ayton. If you play Ayton and Klingon together, and Klingon isn't a 3-point shooter, and Ayton is not a 3-point shooter, although he has a good jumper, I feel like he could move it back a little bit, but can they play a little bit together? We're talking 5 to 7 minutes a game tops.
Right.
If Klingon can hit a three, that could make a little more sense.
Sure.
And who knows if it's going to be right away, he's going to be able to shoot them all right, but he just didn't shoot them in college, and his stroke does look pretty good. And I think that's the thing. They're like, hey, he's going to be a Rudy Gobert type defensively, except he'll be able to shoot threes. Like
Mm-hmm.
that sounds pretty awesome, So
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, he's got a really good defensive floor. I wouldn't call him a Rudy Gobert type. I mean, Rudy
type,
is
not,
real type, right?
yeah,
I mean, he's
yeah,
the thing about Rudy is even with his perimeter defensive flaws, I would say Klingon in that regard is those flaws relative to Gobert are even magnified
yeah.
because he's slower than
Gobert moves
Gobert.
his feet a lot better
He
than
does.
Klingon does. Yeah.
He does.
Um,
So also just a towering, center, and obviously played really well for the Timberwolves. So
yeah, yeah.
anyway, I think that's a relatively good summary of our thoughts with the Blazers kind of draft process. I'll just say that I know I think it's his formal title is maybe VP of Scouting, or Mike Schmitz. I'm talking about. I know he was
Yes.
really high on Klingon,
Yeah.
and
And Advia, to be fair,
and
too.
Avdia exactly. So so clearly clearly Joe Cronin, our GM, is kind of he's kind of providing, like, Mike clearly has a hand in what we're doing here in the off season and with who we're selecting, and so that's it's kind of good to see them working in tandem. And I just think there's a lot to love about kind of, I don't know, it feels like we at least are coming forward with a direction for the team. So we have some of these foundational elements in a center and solid wing defender slash playmaker slash hopefully shooter,
Yeah.
that we can kind of build around, or at least can be like good pieces to build with in the future. I know Blazers front office is really high on high character players, and so I don't think there's any way that they are going to shy away from that. And they were clearly impressed with bringing both of these players into the fold. So
The
pretty
Blazers aren't
happy, I
gonna
would say.
they're not gonna
Yeah,
sign Kevin Porter Jr.
I don't think so. I
What
don't
about
think so.
Miles
No.
Bridges? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Neither of those players, I don't think, are going to be in a Blazers uniform anytime soon.
Yeah.
So
Any other standouts in the draft overall
yeah, so I had a couple. We can maybe just kind of go down the list here. We don't need to go through the entire lottery just due to time, but I'll start by just talking about. I think if we're talking about the draft, we have to talk about the first pick. So Zachary Risache, He was drafted to Atlanta with the first pick. They seemed in the draft room when we were watching the draft, they seemed really excited with that pick. So I have to think that, the workout with him went relatively well. Again, there's a lot of pundits and a lot of folks in the NBA community that seem to have, like are really kind of worried about his game and his ceiling for being the first overall pick. You obviously want the first overall pick and even a weak draft to be an all-star level, all-star caliber player. And a lot of folks I don't think that Risashe can get to that level. But I hope at worst he is a solid 3-and-D wing. We've talked about the comparison of a ceiling being potentially Mikal Bridges type of player. And the Hawks are just kind of in a draft or in a talent acquisition phase, and they just moved on. And we can talk briefly about this, but they just moved DeJounte Murray. Are they going to be a team that even moves a Trae Young? So I would say it's a solid, not spectacular pick. It's a pick that a lot of pundits had Risashe going 1 or 2. And clearly the Hawks were content enough with his workout and with, the type of player that they're getting to feel confident in drafting him 1. Any thoughts on that one, GMAC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's dumb not to take Sar.
Yeah,
As much as I like Risache, it just I know there's not that much of a difference between a first and a second pick, but
yeah.
and I think he'll be fine and good. I just don't ever see him being more than like a good 3-and-D player, which I mean that's very valuable, but like who's the best 3-and-D player in the league? Mikal Bridges, right? Probably. Like
In a certain role, yeah.
sure. Like as someone who's like a decent scorer, a great
Yep,
defender,
yep,
but not an all-star.
yep.
Like if that's your ceiling and that's your number one pick, it's like, I mean, it's not bad, but
Yeah.
it's he is bigger, or at least taller. Not quite as long, but yeah, I do think Alex Sarr is by far the best prospect in this draft, and just
Sure.
I don't know what real reason was it. Just they were afraid he would refuse to play with them, whatever the case may be. Like, because I think you brought it up as like, who the hell would rather be a wizard than a hawk?
Well, and you mentioned like just, I guess more of a I don't know, like on the DC side of things, like if um if Sarr didn't work out for Atlanta because he wanted more of a defined role,
Yeah.
um
He's definitely
I,
going to be a
you know,
power forward, like they're not
yeah.
gonna look at him as a center there, at least early on with Jonas now. And
So I
yeah,
guess
it's just,
that
yeah,
brings us to Sarr probably, right? Like
yeah.
the Wizards. I mean, we should probably talk about him as well, just
Yeah, I
because
think
you
he was,
clearly had him as your first prospect.
yeah,
Yeah,
they were gifted him. Obviously, they
yeah,
made it easy. To me, it wouldn't make sense to take anyone else below him.
yep.
That got taken there. I just think that's an easy pick. Similar to Reece Shea, like he's in that really maybe not an all-star, but he has that potential on. I wouldn't even say it's potential on defense. I think he's going to be immediately impactful on defense, not at like a Wemby level, but we've talked about it before. He just moves so fluidly for his
He
size,
does.
and
If
he's
he
long and he's athletic. It's all going to be what can he do on offense? Can he get a shot? Can he, actually drive? He has good handles, but that's different than when you get in the lane and are able to finish and all that stuff. Is he going to be a lob threat? You haven't seen much of that.
Well, and if he's going to be a 4, can the Wizards surround him with enough shooting?
Yeah,
And you talked about like so Valanciunas goes to Washington just as a free agent on a 3-year, 30 million, very reasonable deal. I feel like for Valanciunas, they also bring back Rashawn Holmes on a 2-year, I think 26,
that was
27 million
weird.
dollar deal.
Yeah,
So maybe they're viewing those two as their centers and Sar. And I don't know how like the Koulibaly and Kuzma fit happen. You would imagine they're maybe looking at moving Kuzma at this
yeah,
point,
yeah,
but with them still in the fold. But you look at like, can Sar be a true 4 and stay on the floor? Like, looking at some of his highlights again, he has that shot kind of off the right shoulder.
yeah.
A little bizarre shooting for him. I wonder if he can make that work long term, and if they can again surround him with enough shooting for him to be an efficient enough player and potent enough offensive player where they can make that work. So that's
Yeah,
my
I think
biggest thing with him. But I think he's a clear second pick. Yeah.
yeah, similar problems to like Evan Mobley.
Yeah.
Although his shot, people, we've had this discussion. Like I actually think he can shoot, he just doesn't shoot enough.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, but like, yeah, Sar, he has a funky looking shot, but it's not like broken. It's just kind of weird to see some when you're that tall, maybe it doesn't matter. But
And you never know. Like, look at Halliburton. Like, that was
yeah,
the biggest. That's probably the sole reason why he fell so far. And it's just like it doesn't matter. So
yeah,
you don't know.
yeah,
Sometimes it's
yeah,
hard. Maybe he's able to do it. Maybe Washington's a good fit for making that happen since he has a little more freedom to let it fly.
yeah. Let's
Um.
run through these a little faster. I
Yep.
don't really
Yep.
have
No
anything
problem.
to say on Reed Shepard. Seems like a
No, that's fine. Let's just
yeah.
touch on like highlights. I
Yeah,
I,
most
I
of
have
these
a
guys
couple.
we've talked about a lot. I think it's just,
Yeah.
hey, do we think like Reed Shepard, good fit in the Rockets, Stefan Castle, good fit for the Spurs. Ron Holland was a surprise based on a lot of the
Definitely.
intel. Apparently he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn in workouts and even stopped shooting them in some of them because it
Yeah.
was like that. And then, of course, what the Pistons need the most is some shooting. But he's big, athletic, works really hard. So it's not like they're in a hurry. We wanted Salone for the Blazers, I think, as this was playing out. Like that's who I was like, okay, he's going to be
Yeah.
available. We're going to have to take
Yeah.
him. I actually think that's a good draft pick for the Hornets. They need,
I like it. I
yeah,
like the
they
fit with
need that.
Mark Williams and Brandon Miller. He's like the perfect four if he can develop there. That's a really good fit with them because he's a high motor player
Yeah,
at worst, and so him getting Lamelo and Brandon Lobs is going to be
yeah,
pretty nice, I think.
yep. And
Yeah,
then
so we were, and there
Dillingham,
wasn't a lot of buzz from like for Charlotte taking him, right?
no,
So it was
no,
kind of like out of
there's,
left field a little
I
bit.
think a lot of Castle to him was where it was.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
we'll skip the Blazers. Obviously, we talked
Yep.
about that. But Dillingham going to the Timberwolves, and which didn't seem like they had to give too much up, in my
No.
opinion. And one of the things you noticed in the playoffs is they had a lack of creators. As good as Cat is, he's not someone you can like have him create off the dribble or something, right? They had Edwards and a little bit of Conley, and they needed something extra. And so they made that trade for Dillingham. And then they also picked up Terrence Shannon Jr., which, he's a pretty good defender. He's got some length. Like it sounds like they're going to lose Kyle Anderson. So they needed some more wing depth. But I thought that was a shrewd trade.
Great. I agree with you. And they have, at that level, they have the defense around Rob
Yep.
Dillingham to support that because he was a bottom 1% college
He's
level
tiny.
defender.
He's
He's
tiny.
very small. I think we talked about this maybe on the last pod, but I think he weighed in at like 164 pounds, I think, at the combine, which is just really small. So even as a point guard in this league, you have to have some size, or at least be able to put on size to be able to fight through screens and be at least not an absolute target on defense. But Minnesota relying on their athletic tandem on the perimeter of McDaniels and Edwards, and then obviously they have Gobert to protect the rim.
Yep.
Good secondary defenders around them, and I think they can make it work. So it sounded like from what Jonathan Gavoni at ESPN was talking about, he had chatted with the Timberwolves front office, in the previous days before the draft, and they were just absolutely enamored with Dillingham. So I think it was pretty clear that they were, if they could, and he was available at 8, they were going to trade in. I like you're saying, you never know what's going to happen, but because they have Edwards and Gobert, I think only has 2 years. They kind of have to push their chips in at this point and just see what can happen.
I mean, they
You
got
don't want to give
close,
up picks,
you
and
know.
they did get close. They were almost in the finals. So you hope you can make it work. He's obviously going to be more of a spark plug, and then you talk about Terrence Shannon Jr., also an older prospect at I think 24 now, or at least when the season starts, he'll be 24. That's a good pickup as well. So you hope to just put a little bit of offense. That's kind of where they fell short against the Mavs, and
Yeah.
hope to put a little offense in their step there. So
Yeah. Edie, I wouldn't say this is a surprise. I mean, based on that, but like everyone knew the
yeah,
Grizzlies wanted Clingan or
yep,
Edie essentially. So, I
yep,
mean, I think that makes sense that he's in a good position where he's not going to be like relied on to do a lot of scoring. I mean, not that he couldn't do that, but he won't have to, I think he'll be like, 20 minutes a game. I think they'll start him honestly, like from the
yeah,
game. Cody Williams, we both liked him for the Blazers at 7. Rumor was he was never going to fall past the Jazz. Matas, I actually think that's a good pick at 11, especially with the Bulls kind of starting over.
I
Um,
think it's fine. Yep.
yeah, Topic, might as well take a flyer on him if you're the Thunder. It's not like you have room to incorporate anyone right now. So,
Any rookie they drafted wasn't going to play there this season, so
yeah,
it
yeah.
might as well take a flyer and see if you can get some good playmaking in the 2025-2026 season.
Devin Carter was a little surprising because
Yeah.
they re-signed Monk, but they did let Dave, or they didn't let him go. They traded Davion Mitchell.
Yep.
I think Devin Carter's awesome for them.
Perfect fit.
Yep. And then
Just because
the Wiz,
Davion to the Raptors, you're saying, yeah, that
yeah,
was my comment. It's like, oh, they just given up on Davion, and then like the next day
yeah. I
they
mean,
moved him.
I'd
So
rather have Devin Carter. And then
yeah,
the Blazers traded again to the Wizards, and they took Bub Carrington, who that's probably a little high, but I think he is going to be good. I mean, he kind of reminds me of CJ a little bit, mid-range, a little taller.
yeah,
He's
he's not a
really
great
young.
shot creator yet. I wouldn't say like CJ was coming out of college, but
He can't, he
he's
doesn't
big.
shoot threes or drive though, like kind of
Yeah,
how CJ was early
right,
on. So,
right.
and then the only one that I mean, there's some good players that we talked about here, but I think Dalton Connect was the biggest drop
I had him
far.
noted as well. Yep.
Um, so I think the Lakers, if he stays there, like you can always use more shooting. Obviously, JJ Redick sees himself a little bit in that. But
JJ
anyone else
drafted
that
himself was
stands
the running
out?
joke. Yeah. Yeah, just like you talked about, JJ drafted himself for that for that Dalton pick. I think they were floored that Dalton dropped all the way to 17. There was
Yeah,
folks. I mean, I would have been. I'm more surprised that Ron Holland was drafted by Detroit than I would have been surprised if they had drafted Dalton at 5. So that kind of goes to show you that range. But again, like we
yeah,
talked about, this draft, because it's considered a weaker draft, you never know where players after like 3 are really going to be going 3 to even into the teens. So the other one I'll say is just, and we've talked about this, AJ Johnson going to the Bucks at
yeah,
23, pretty big surprise. I was going to mention to you, it kind of reminds me of when we drafted Simons, similar
yep.
range years ago. Was that 4 or 5 years ago
And
now?
no one really knew what to think. I mean, he's a
NBA,
similar
like
player too. Yeah.
under 3 points per game in the NBL.
Yeah, you
I
give him
guess
Bronny a hard time,
I guess he really impressed in workouts, and Bucks really liked him.
He's a good
So
athlete or a great athlete, I should say. Like he is very similar to Simons. Like
yeah,
great
that's
athlete.
kind of the comparison. So,
Yeah.
but again, how many years did it take Simons to even like really see the
Yeah.
floor? Like
And did you
like
need to
Bucks
take
are win
him?
now.
Yeah,
Bucks are win now.
did
So
you have to take him there? I mean, I like Tyler Smith as a flyer
yeah,
too, like a big
yep,
man that can shoot
yep.
theoretically. I
That's a
mean, he
good
can
flyer.
do that. It's not, is he really, can he play as a big man? But yeah, nothing. I mean, the second, there's a lot of guys we liked in here. And I think it would have been nice if we kept our picks and got them on two ways from just an interest standpoint, but
I
nothing else.
thought I thought just from a team perspective, the Jazz had a good draft.
Yeah,
They got Cody at 10.
they got the Mormon.
They got Kyle Filipowski early in the second, and then they also drafted Isaiah Collier in the late first. And Isaiah
Yeah,
Collier, if folks recall, was,
he was
I
a
think he was drafted,
projected
what,
top
28,
five.
29? He was
Yeah,
projected like, yeah, he was a number one high school player last year. Obviously had an injury at USC, had not even, after the injury came back to USC pretty strong. I feel like, I thought he was going to go in like right after the lottery, pretty much from pick like 15 to 20, somewhere in that range. I was surprised that he fell, and I think that could be a good pick for the Jazz. So I thought they had a solid draft. I also really like Filipowski and just like what he brings, and kind of a replacement potentially for Kelly Olynyk, who's traded
hmm,
to the Raptors last season. So anyway,
yeah.
from a team perspective, I like their draft.
Yeah, and we'll do a full, obviously after free agency and all the draft stuff, and maybe we'll do some summer league stuff, but we'll
Yep,
definitely do like some team previews before the season starts. And I think it's going to be really fun to see how some of these guys fit in.
totally. Yeah, for
All
editing.
right, so early stages of free agency now. Some of the real big names are off the board. Anything jump out at you?
Oh man, we talk about the Northwest being such a great place to summer, as I like to call it with the verb summer. Um, I mean, July 1st and early July, NBA free agency, all the signings, and this is a pretty big year because of the second apron hit, and then just team. It's almost like having a hard cap now.
Yep.
It's been a fun past day and looking at all these moves. I would say there's obviously been some huge ones. I think it was kicked off by the Mikal Bridges trade, not necessarily a signing, but Mikal Bridges to the Knicks to form the Nova 4 Knicks. That and then they also, subsequent to that, the Knicks also re-signed OG Anunoby for a massive contract. So that's going to be a really fun team. I mean, they have
All they've
Jalen.
lost is Hartenstein.
The only one they've lost is Hardenstein, but I mean that core of Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, DiVincenzo, Josh Hart,
Randall
and Randall is wow. Like
and
that is just,
even
and
and
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
Robinson still,
And
and
Mitchell Robinson, and
yeah,
so and some of those guys are just on like, I mean, DiVincenzo and Brunson, obviously their contracts kind of allowed that to happen, right? Because they're just
yeah,
such, they got them at such a good price. But that's kind of what kicked it off, and I think that was late last week, right, where Mikal
yeah.
Bridges, that deal happened. They they paid a lot to have that happen, I will say. So that Mikal Bridges deal, part of the original Phoenix Durant deal, and they secured, and then this is being the Nets when I talk about they secured unprotected first in 25, 27, 29, 2031, a swap in 2028, a top 4 protected first from the Bucks, and a second rounder both in 2025. So I mean, they basically, that's like historically giving up for like you know, a all NBA level player, basically, right? So they just kind of gave up the moon
Didn't they make a side
to get
deal
him.
too to get back their picks too, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
So they can actually tank and not and have it be for themselves. Yeah.
exactly. So there's no, they're not really able to be swindled, I guess is how you'd put it.
Yeah.
But that's just a massive deal. Mikal, I think, made it known that he wanted to end up with the Knicks, and forming that again, the Villanova, the former Villanova teammates. I mean, that's just really fun. The Knicks have their core set for the next half a decade. That's a really fun team, and so that's kind
Yeah.
of what kicked it off for me. Obviously, we can go through some of these
It's just so
other
nice to have
acquisitions, but yeah,
knowing like I was a Knicks fan, obviously,
yeah,
back in the Spreewell days,
yep,
my favorite player. And it's nice having the Knicks be good, way more so for me than the Lakers because I just hate the Lakers so much. But it's just that Oregon, they're on. We're gonna have NBC back next year,
yeah.
like that's just gonna be so nostalgic for me. And they've had a few years here and there, but they weren't exactly likable teams. Like
No,
I feel like
and
it's hard not to like these guys.
yeah, it's kind of been, I mean, they had a really good playoff run, obviously, and also just like you're talking about, the core that they have is just really fun to root for, and it's
Yeah.
such a big market. They've never won, it's been decades since they've obviously contended for a title. Well, not necessarily contended, late 90s, early 2000s, but since they've actually won, obviously, and then just having the biggest market in the country have a really good team is
Yeah.
just nice for ratings and kind of bringing visibility to the NBA. So,
Yeah.
they're just
Just
really
it's
fun. Of
a
course,
lot of
I really
history
love
there.
Brunson and
Yeah.
stuff too. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the other big thing that's happened is Paul George left for nothing.
Paul
Which
George
is
left. Yep.
yeah, there's absolutely no questioning now that the OKC won that trade.
Oh
I mean,
man.
even if Shea didn't turn out to be such a good player, like you lose a player for nothing, and that's the end of it. And I mean, I wouldn't say they got nothing while he was there, right? Like those were good Clippers teams, similar to the Chris Paul Clippers teams. They couldn't get over the hump, whether it was injuries or matchups or whatever the thing is. In this case, it was mostly injuries. I think Paul George and Kawhi were like healthy together maybe once in their playoff runs. But
Yeah,
like
that's
they
really
made
tough.
the year they made the conference finals in the bubble, that was without Kawhi. So
Exactly.
it's
So for
yeah,
the clip side, I'll play off of that a little bit. That, I mean, they sent out the press release
that
basically
was
saying
weird.
that was kind of weird. They also said that there was a huge disconnect from like where they were at and what they were willing to offer PG, and then what he actually ended up taking with the Sixers. That didn't really make much sense because if you have Kawhi, you have Harden that re-signed for 2 years. What is the huge disconnect for bringing back Paul George to your team, even
Yeah.
if it's like offering a fourth year? Were you only willing to offer 3 years? Did the player want a no trade clause? Did you know what was the big disconnect? They said the gap was really large, and I just don't understand how the
Like
gap
one
could be
year
large
is
if it
what it
was like
looked
for
like.
1 year or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that didn't really make sense to me at all. Obviously, a huge get for the Sixers, and that is I mean, it doesn't get more hand and glove fit really with Maxey, Embiid, and PG at the
Yep.
helm for them, and then they fill in around the pieces you mentioned for the Sixers, re-signing Kelly Oubre to a really team-friendly contract. That's really underrated. He's a really good
You got
role
Eric
player and
Gordon on a
defender.
really small deal. Was
Eric
it
Gordon, Andre Drummond, like
Drummond?
they've had a really good
Yeah.
offseason. So
Yeah, they lost Batum, which he
yep,
was pretty integral. He was going back to the Clippers, ironically.
yep,
But yeah, I mean, they're going to again, injuries notwithstanding, they should be
yeah.
good, but they should be more equipped to, I won't want to say like sit guys and rest them, but like, hopefully not have to get their 65 games in, do some platooning, and still, have some good results. Because I think people are gonna, like usually with those type of teams, you can get some good vets in that are willing to play, and they still need to find a couple pieces here and there. But I saw that Melton signed with the Warriors. I
I
thought
saw that
he
just
would have
now.
been a
Yeah,
really good returning piece. I've always thought he was a good, guard
yep,
defender.
yep.
But yeah, I think they'll figure it out. So,
The big thing with them is just health, like you talked about with PG. I mean, both PG and Embiid, you're looking at like 65 games would be a wonder. I don't know if either of them have played 65 games in the
I
past
meant
3 or 4
combined.
years. Okay, yeah. So if you can get in the low to mid 50s, honestly, in the regular season, I call that a win for either of those players. And hopefully you have high 40s, low 50s and wins at that point, and you can go into the playoffs. Whereas seeding doesn't matter, it seems like, as much these days. So that would be the hope, I guess, is just that you're able to kind of piecemeal together the rest of the roster with players that are able to kind of take you over that hump in the regular season, and then you get to the playoffs and make a big run. I don't think it's necessarily something where they're trying to set a wins record, by any means anyways, just because with Embiid and Paul George, you have to be really cognizant of what's going to be what's going to sustain them through the postseason and get them to what their ultimate desired goal is in a championship, obviously. So yeah,
Yeah, I
that's a
forgot they
really
had
good
Jared
depth chart with
McCain
them.
too. He was a
Yeah,
good,
Jared McCain, really good pickup at pick
yeah.
16 for them. So yeah,
Yeah, so he'll get some spot up looks for sure, and that's his specialty. I mean, some of these happened a lot, like Pascal's going back. Sounds like DeMar DeRozan. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in Laker Town.
they. So the interesting thing with DeMar, I would say, just as you have that chart up, like the Bulls signed Jalen Smith from
Yeah,
Indy, and then they brought Patrick Williams back on I think 5 years, 90 million,
yeah,
which I thought was a pretty solid deal. So that only leaves them about 15 million below the tax for DeRozan. So I highly doubt that
and he
he's
and
going to be going.
Vucevic. I mean, I guess I saw a rumor, or maybe it wasn't a rumor; it was a report. Was it Mark? I don't know who it was. I'd like to give him. Who used to be with ESPN back in the day? Mark, not
Mark Stein,
Spears,
Mark
Stein,
Stein, yeah.
who basically said that they're attaching a pick at least to Zach LaVine to get rid of him, and no one wants him still. Like,
And then I think I saw something. I didn't see that exact report, but I would say if that's the case, then the market for Levine has. I mean, maybe there's injury stuff that I'm not aware of, and his rehab is not going well. But I think that the market has maybe swung a little bit too far in the wrong direction if that's where we're at with Levine, because he's still a very capable, even with all that money, he's still a pretty capable,
yeah, I
really
mean,
really
he
efficient shooter. So I don't know.
he
Yeah,
had that year where he averaged 27 or whatever, and then it went to 24, 24, and then 20 last year. And I mean, he still shot well. He was 45% from the field, 35% from three, but obviously only played 25 games. And I mean,
yeah, and you
when I
never
was
know what
like,
he was.
he's 28, I was like, I didn't realize he was that old. Like,
Oh, really? Yeah,
yeah,
I don't mind him as much. I would say, like, I know he has a high contract, but
But yeah, the
Yeah.
Lakers may end up with him. You never know. But yeah, he's had a couple really good years of 3-point shooting, but and it's been decent on other years, but not great. So it's
There was that really fun Chicago run where they had Lonzo, DeMar, and Levine. I think it was the first year of DeMar there, and that was they like started out with a really
yeah,
really great in the first 25 games or something, and it was like, oh man,
Caruso
Bulls are
and
back.
Ball both got hurt,
Yeah,
and
exactly. And it
it
was just
was
like
just over.
that's really tough.
Yeah,
I'll bring it to the next probably biggest one is Klay Thompson.
yeah,
And I think details are being worked through, but Klay to the Mavs, a huge upgrade over Tim Hardaway, obviously, and it ends the historic Hall of Fame legendary run with him, Draymond, and Steph in Oakland and now San Francisco for the Warriors. But I mean, you mention all the time, like obviously not the defender he once was, but he's still an absolute sniper from three. And you hope that as his rehab for both ACL as well as Achilles, obviously happening in back-to-back off seasons, you hope that he can reclaim a little bit of that defense. But I think what does favor him just defensively, even as he's got good size still. So you hope that, some of the Warriors size around him can be helpful in that regard. They've got active rim runners at the center spot, rim protectors. They just signed Najee Marshall. So really team friendly
yeah.
deal, 3 years, 27 million.
I
So
don't think they're gonna rely on him. Like I think he's coming off the bench, honestly.
oh, do you? I think he's going to start at the two, but who
Yeah,
knows, right?
I
I
think
think that was promised to him as part of this deal. I
yeah,
think is
maybe. Man,
I
they
think that was
really don't
promised to
have
him.
like losing. I think losing Derek Jones Jr. is like just having a guy every night's going to go take the other team's best player and like not complain about it or anything. Like I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, and maybe they do. I mean, we'll see who starts between Najee and PJ Washington at the four, but I guess that would be telling. But
Yeah,
I think that they'll start Clay, but who knows? You never know.
yeah, yeah. I guess. I mean, I guess if it's between Clay and Najee Marshall, that it's not like. I mean, unless Clay's defense is absolutely horrid, then
Yeah,
like that would be the only reason. But he's
yeah,
probably
yeah.
still
Like
a plus.
him and Luca together or something. It's just like maybe
Yeah,
they're just
yeah.
really taking it
So
on the chin defensively. I can bring it to the next one with Atlanta. That's a pretty big move. They traded DeJounte Murray to the Pelicans for
mhm.
Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance Jr., 2025 first and a 2027 first, which is the least favorable of the Bucks Pels.
Yeah, I think that's a good trade.
That's a good trade, worthy shot for Pels. For Pelicans, it's a
I like
team that's
Dyson, and I
obviously
told you
all
I like
in.
Dyson Daniels, but like
Yeah, and
just
I
not
like
space
Dyson too.
for him.
Yeah,
Like you got Trey Murphy and Herbert Jones, and then like keeping CJ, I think is huge because he's still a really good offensive player. Um, I don't love the backcourt because I mean I know DeJounte is not tiny, but he's also not big. But you're going to be asking him. I mean, maybe you don't have to. I mean, with Herb and
Trey
I
Murphy.
do
It's
you
funny because
start? I mean, do you just start Zion at center pretty much now?
no, I mean I don't think they can afford to. Ideally, yeah, but it's just like we have
I
that
think that
discussion
just
all the
ends up
time.
being the lineup a lot, though. It's going to be DeJounte,
To
CJ,
close, maybe.
Herb, Trey
Yep,
Murphy, and Zion. Like maybe
true.
that's not the starting lineup, but that's what you're finishing with.
And I like their center pick in that rotation too with Missy. At I think 21 they got him,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's
good
good.
athlete.
Um, I
He's not going to start that. I mean, I think they'll
I
probably
don't think so.
because they got rid of Nance
Um,
and Jonas.
yeah, exactly. I like. So you mentioned Dyson Daniels. Good, just big playmaking guard and pretty defensively minded. I know we had the discussion of Sharp versus Daniels ad nauseum like in 2 drafts ago. So
Yeah.
um, really like that. I think the
Oh,
one
they
thing I
still
was
have Brandon Ingram on the roster, by the
and they
way.
still have Brandon Ingram. I mean, it's funny because you talk about, so they had Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, who's just like, talk about a 3-and-D wing, maybe not quite as defensively minded, but absolutely awesome shot on Trey Murphy.
And huge.
Um, and huge. Herbert Jones. And then they had Najee Marshall, who just
Yeah.
signed with the Mavs. They obviously saw Brandon Ingram. So they just had a glut of like big wings.
Yeah, you got to
And so
consolidate.
yeah,
Yeah.
you got to consolidate. You got to figure out which direction you're going to go in. But that's a really good. I mean,
Yeah. So maybe they'll
I'm
bring
sorry.
in a center with a. I think it sounds like Ingram's going to get traded. So
Yeah, I would imagine he's traded, but I mean, I remember a few years ago, it was like, what are the Pels doing? And I think it's David Griffin, right? Like that's their GM. He's done a
Mhm.
pretty good job of kind of retooling around their key pieces. So that's a big one. Did you have one you wanted to touch on, GMAC?
I mean, not really. I think based on what we're seeing, there's not really any big pieces left. And so there's been a lot of rumors about like Jeremy Grant or Anthony Simons
Yeah,
getting traded. Personally, like I like both of those guys, but if the plan is indeed to have Scoot and Sharp start,
yeah,
right? Like, and then you have Avdivia. I'm always gonna misplace it. Avdia,
yeah,
be a starter, and I still like Tumani a lot. I think he's more effective as a starter than off the bench.
right.
Like you have that kind of core that maybe you want to build, and I get you don't want to just get rid of all your vets, but at the same time, like yeah, you can have vets be bench players and stuff, kind of like Malcolm was supposed to be last year. I would like to see, and the rumor of Jeremy Grant to the Lakers has been like, well, they don't want to give up 2 first-round picks, and it's like, well, throw Dalton Connect in there. We'll consider that. Like, I would
Yeah, we consider
love,
Dalton, I think. So it would be something like Rui, Dalton, and another first. Is that what you're thinking?
yeah, I think it's Rui, Gabe Vincent. So there's your backup point guard, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to eventually trade Simons for salary, and then yeah, Connect and a first for.
Oh, that seems like a pretty good haul for Grant if we're getting those
Yeah,
three
I
players
mean,
and a first.
the other
I don't
thing
even
I've
know if
heard
we'd
is,
fetch that, honestly.
yeah, they've been saying D'Angelo Russell, and then we would like push
No,
him
thank you.
somewhere else. I don't think the Lakers want to get rid of him either. Like, yeah, he had a
I
couple
could
of
see him
bad
getting rid of
games
him,
in the
but
playoffs, but he also won them a few games. So
yeah,
uh,
he's really hit or miss. Honestly, he has
he
big
is,
swings for the Lakers. I also think that LeBron's not the easiest to play with, but
yeah.
he does have huge swings, and I think when he's off, he's benched.
And
I
then,
mean,
well,
he's a
maybe the
player
plan is
that's
trade him and then start Bronny at point. No.
yeah, right. Yeah,
I don't think Bronny actually sees the court much. Obviously,
someone is making the comparison. You probably saw this of, well, Bronny's just the next Avery Bradley. It's like I don't think you remember how good Avery
yeah.
Bradley
Avery
was. Like
Bradley was double
he was
digit points and a ridiculous defender.
and a ridiculous defender. I mean, if he
Yeah.
turns into that, more power to him. Like Bronny seems to be kind of taking a little sidetrack here. He seems to be for being like a Hall of Fame top 2 all-time player's son, he seems to be in a good headspace and like accepting all these narratives and all this media that's being thrown at him. So I will say that. But yeah, I mean, don't say that and then say, oh yeah, like
Yeah.
everyone's saying Avery Bradley now. I don't see it.
I'm trying to think of a really athletic 6'1" point guard that
I mean, I
would.
think size-wise, it's fair. I just don't expect him to develop that level of three-point shot or be that much of a menace
No,
defensively.
no. I mean,
So
he's looked. I don't want to talk too much about Bronny. I mean,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think picking him at 55 is pure nepotism, like either.
No, no.
I'm
I
like,
think, and it sounds like other teams would have considered it if it wasn't for LeBron's camp saying like he's going to
yeah,
go play in Australia if you
yeah.
select
Why
him. So,
not? Why not? I mean, keep your best player happy too. Like
yep.
with your
And
55th pick, and it's not like
I
he's
mean,
like he has to start next to me.
someone made a point like, oh yeah, nepotism, and then they showed like the entire Dallas Cowboys front office. It's
Yeah,
like Jerry
exactly.
Jones, and then it's like
I
all of
mean,
his
Chauncey
relatives.
Billups' brother was on the
I
Blazers
know.
coaching
It's
roster.
just
Like, who
that's
the hell's
natural. Like
what was the
like
guy?
their
What was
players. Yeah.
Dame's cousin's name?
I know. Yeah, I don't remember, but yeah, I remember that too.
Some weird, Kelvin Blevins.
Yeah, Kelvin Blevins. Okay, yeah,
Elgin Blevins. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, yeah. I mean, it's like if it's just that spot, like I don't know if you can use something better than to keep your guy
Well,
happy.
and I
But
mean, let's be honest here. Like, there's a chance that he's actually. I mean, there's a pretty good track record of. And again, Bronny had a terrible season at USC. He had the
heart,
congenital
he
heart
had a
defect or
freaking
something
heart
last.
problem.
I
Yeah.
mean, this is not a player that's like, oh, we're just doing this for LeBron. He could actually turn
Yeah.
into
He was
something. Like
projected
this
to
is
be
LeBron James'
good
son. So
coming
yeah,
out of high
exactly.
school. Yeah.
So I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
wanted
mean,
to
if they
bring. I
would have
wanted.
taken him in the first round or something, that would have
Sure,
been
sure.
weird.
That's fair.
But yeah, waiting until the fifth to last pick, like no big deal. Like most of those guys in the last 15 picks like never see the league. So
Exactly.
might as
Exactly.
well
Like
take a
it's
chance
complete
on
flyer.
something.
Complete flyer.
Yeah,
I,
that's pretty much it. I'm just waiting to see how it shakes out. I think for me, the earlier things happen, the better for Blazers in
yeah.
terms of, planning things. Like last year with the Dame stuff happening so late, like it just kind of threw everything into a loop. And also like the guy getting traded when you're traded that fast, that doesn't help either. So you just want to have,
We should also mention that this is day one. So this is a
yeah,
quickly evolving situation. We don't have the Clay thing literally dropped in the last hour
yep, yep.
where that was
So,
confirmed. So this is day one of free agency. There's going to be a lot of changes in the next week or two, a lot of signings, potential trades,
yeah.
a
I
couple
mean, there's
other
a
really
lot
quick
of
ones.
good role players that are still, unrestricted free agents in here that are going to find homes. Like,
I
I
love,
see someone saying, oh, if we can sign Sadiq Bey for the
yeah.
mid-level exception, why
Oh, yeah,
trade for Jeremy? Things like that.
totally. I
So,
loved a couple other really quick ones just because I think they're worth mentioning that I really loved was Kentavious Caldwell Pope, 3 years, 66 million to Orlando. It's
oh yeah,
exactly what they needed next to Suggs, and then Orlando
hurts
just has such
Simon's
good
option.
size. That's a great shooter with defense. Um, maybe that helps. I know Franz Wagner had a really down year, so maybe that helps him kind of open up the floor a little bit more. That they actually have
Yeah,
a two that can shoot. The other one I was a little surprised. I love the signing. Isaiah Hartenstein got paid.
yeah.
I was really surprised he got 3 years, 87 million, almost 30 million a year. I was really surprised
That's
at
a
that number.
lot.
I thought he would be in the 345 range or something, 350
Yeah.
maybe tops. I mean, Valanciunas just got 330, and I know he's not the defender, but Hartenstein played a really integral role to the Knicks in the postseason. But man, I can't believe he turned that into 3 years,
Yeah, I
$90
mean,
million.
ultimately he's a backup center, I
Yeah,
think. So, because I don't think Oklahoma City's gonna push Chet down to four,
no, no,
especially since they just got Caruso. Like they want to start that
absolutely.
terrifying defense.
I
But
was surprised that Presti went in with that deal. I realize he's important. They also re-signed some really team-friendly contracts like Isaiah
yeah,
Joe, Aaron Wiggins, who
yeah,
both played well for them last year. So I was surprised at that one. And the other really quick note I'll make, and I talked to you about this yesterday, is just the Nuggets losing out. And I'll be
yeah.
interesting. I know they have some quote like what you mentioned, internal development, but last 2 seasons they lost Bruce Brown, Contavious Caldwell Pope now, and then Reggie Jackson. And I know that the second apron is doing them no favors, but that's really tough. You want to take advantage of Jokic's prime, and I really hope that they're able to retool because that's such a fun team to watch. I know they're in our division, but I,
I actually
you know,
kind of thought that Melton was a good spot, but he
yeah,
got a lot of
yeah,
money. I was
yeah,
surprised. But yeah, you
yeah.
still
Just a
got
1 year
like
though, right? Yeah,
yeah, you could see. I mean, I could see Gary Trent, or I know these guys aren't defenders, but Trent or Healed, types of the guys that you can kind of plug in. Maybe they bring Beasley back, who was just,
true.
they can
Just that.
shoot, but not a lot of, you don't see a lot of like defenders in here that are
Well, and
available.
that's what like KCP and Bruce Brown were such good defenders for them.
Yeah,
So, and that's really what they valued around
specifically
Jokic,
perimeter. Yeah,
perimeter defenders. Yeah. So I
yeah.
just thought that that was worth noting. I know we're kind of Blazer centric with our analysis here. And so
I'm not
to your
seeing a lot
point,
of options here.
I think to your point, it's going to be what is the move around Jeremy Grant and or Anthony Simons at this point? What does that look like?
There's still Robert Williams and
And Robert Williams was the
Matisse.
other one. And
Matisse.
honestly, do we, I would imagine we start the season with 8, and I don't think he's going anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot. I know Kevin O'Connor at the Ringer mentioned, oh, I'm taking my, I'm going back on my take around can Aiton and Klingan go together. I know, I don't see Aiton being able to play the four at all. I know he has a perimeter shot, but it's typically like 18 feet and in. And
Yeah.
it's been effective at this point, but stretching out to 3 at this point, and then just defensively on the perimeter, I don't see that being an option. Again, I hope to be wrong, and we can do our own version of the Twin Towers like Minnesota does with Gobert
It's
and
not, I
Cat.
mean, I'm fine with them trying to play like we did with Robert Williams last year, like
Right.
5 to 7 minutes
Short
a game.
spurts.
But like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
not a starting
No.
combination that I ever want to see.
So we'll see what happens with that. But again, this is day one, and a really exciting time. So I think you and I were like, yeah, we have to figure out a time to jump on and just talk about the deals that have been made and then how it impacts Blazers. And then we hadn't done a draft analysis at this point. So
Yeah.
a lot of things happening, and obviously we watched the draft together and it was an exciting draft. I don't know what you thought, but I liked having the first
Yeah.
round on Wednesday and then the second round on Thursday. I thought that was a really nice twist, and a couple
Yeah.
deals happened because of that. I think maybe they eventually go to 3 rounds
I
plus.
think they just do. They need to do the first round and the second round at the same time. Then that
Yeah, they could do
won't
that
take.
as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, just like, hey, first round, first pick, second
Yep.
round, first pick, and then I'm just kidding. Nope, you can't pick him. He's the second rounder.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Um,
I was wondering where you were going with that. I was like, wait, that's a
just
possibility. Okay.
pre-record it and then
Yeah,
pre-record
yeah.
the second round and then do the first round live.
Some guy goes second round, second pick, and he's like, I
Yeah.
thought it was lottery.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it just takes so long. Like even that second round took forever. It's like
I
if
can't
they've had
believe,
a
yeah.
full day, let's try to make this, let's give them
I think it's
2 minutes
like
to pick.
3.5 hours.
Yeah. And they even had the
Recording
green room
picks.
still, which was weird. So
Yeah, I felt bad for some of those. You always do for the
yeah.
guys that get a green room
Hey, you
invites
wanna
and don't get selected.
come back tomorrow for the so
Yeah.
cool. Well,
So
we'll
anyway,
probably, the next time we jump on, if it's before Summer League, because I think that would be the next time we chatted, specifically, it will be if there's like trades or other movement on the Blazers roster. I mean, we will not be signing any free agents that aren't, exhibit 10s or two
yeah.
ways or Summer League guys. So I don't know if we need to jump on for that, but if someone is traded from the current roster, fairly big one, we'll hop back on, but otherwise probably a couple weeks is when summer league starts. So I know we've got vacations and all that stuff planned, but let's plan on that as the next time.
Sounds good. That's great.
Cool.
Appreciate our audience and for this new show. Obviously, GMAC and I are really passionate about all things Blazers analysis, as well as just more on the fringe NBA material. So we really enjoy doing this. Appreciate our audience, and thank you for the new viewers, and like and subscribe.
Yeah, sounds good because that's
All
the
right.
only way we make money. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
definitely not making money. All right. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, everybody.